Should we wait for Derek to actually say
Hey,
something?
I'm saying something because we're live now, or at least
Oh,
we're trying to go live. So, hi, everybody. Welcome back to another monthly episode of Scalable Multiplayer Game Design with OpenShift. I'm your host, Eric Jacobs. Joining us today, we've got Jared, and I'm going to butcher your last name because I can't remember from last month how you pronounce it.
Sprague.
Sprague. Jared Sprague.
Like plague.
And Roddy Kiley.
But a little bit different.
Yeah.
Hey, folks.
Roderick Keeley. I butchered it as
Kylie.
well. Kylie. All right. So yeah, what are we gonna do today? So I was a busy little beaver in the off time, and I built a really janky Ruby application that hold on, I'm watching my Twitch do something weird on my phone here. What is going on? It says we're still starting soon. Anyway, I'm just going to pretend like nothing's happening. So we says we're live. I was a busy little beaver, and I wrote a really crappy Ruby application that uses Red Hat single sign-on to act kind of as a game lobby, if you will, and it talks to. Oh man, it talks to itself. It uses Sinatra, and it has like a really rudimentary chat, and it uses GitHub for the actual real authentication. So Red Hat single sign-on is really just kind of acting as a pass-through IDP. So let me make my font and stuff a little bit bigger here, and we'll get into this real quick. So one of the things that most multiplayer games have is like they've got this lobby experience where before you get into the game, you see stuff. So in the case of like Call of Duty, you see your little bad dude or bad dudette walking around, and you got your gear on, or whatever. You can choose your different game modes and do some other things. And so the Space Ring Things game lobby is this Ruby app. And so the first thing is to use Keycloak or Red Hat single sign-on for authentication, right? And so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through this really fast, as fast as we can, just to show that it is sort of functional and that it's a real thing. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the game design and the game architecture. Derek may join us. I think he's floating around somewhere. But anyway, so one of the cool things about OpenShift is this concept of operators. And if you've been watching many of our live streams in the past, you've probably seen these before. But the easiest way to think about an operator is it's just a pod that runs some software, and that software is basically a control loop. And so you've got this YAML object, and the software looks at the YAML object, and it says, oh, you're asking me to do something. I'm going to go make sure that that something happens. The first thing we're going to do here, we got to use the operator hub to install the single sign-on operator. Well, what does that mean? As a cluster administrator, if I go to the administrator view, let me make my font a little bigger here. I can go to operator hub and I can install the operator. And so what installing the operator does is it makes it available for other people in my cluster to use. So I'm going to basically make the operator available to users of this OpenShift environment. I have created a project called SRT, I think. I did not create a project called SRT. Can I create it here? Nope. Sorry, user error already. That didn't take very long. So we're going to create a project. We're going to call it SRT, which stands for Space Ring Things. Go back to Operator Hub. We're going to install the SSO operator. And we're going to install it in SRT. Okay, install. And so what's happening right now is there's this feature of OpenShift called Operator Lifecycle Manager that is doing the prerequisites for installing this operator. One of the things that operators rely on is a Kubernetes concept called CRD, Custom Resource Definition. And as you can see here, provided APIs, a custom resource definition is a way to extend the Kubernetes API. You actually make new API objects. And in the case of single sign-on, there is an API object now called a Keycloak realm, a Keycloak backup, and so on and so forth. At this point, the single sign-on operator is installed in the SRT project, and it's available to be used. It's looking for instances of these API objects. I'm going to paste the URL for the Ruby lobby. Oh man, what did we change the name of the GitHub org to?
It's Red Hat -game dev.
All right, so if I go to Red Hat Game Dev and I go to Ruby lobby, I think I have everything pushed here. Let me come in here to the chat. I will paste. So if you want to look at the repo or look at the instructions, let me make sure that I actually have. Last commit is remove gem lock file. Remove gem lock file. Perfect. Okay, so we are up to date. All right, the instructions say, what kind of funny code is this? It doesn't look like the best language. The best language is C#. People are already complaining about Ruby. I am a complete clown hack of a developer, and the only thing that I can do is Ruby, and I can copy and paste my way from Stack Overflow with Python. So I went with Ruby for this. Use the operator hub to install the operator, create an auth project, and then create a key cloak instance which deploys SSO in its database. So I can't even follow my own directions. Let's do this. I'm going to go to projects, and I will create the auth project again, or I will create the auth project that it asks for. And then it says, create a key cloak instance which deploys Red Hat SSO and its database. If we look here, this is a very simple YAML definition of a key cloak with one instance, so there's no real HA or anything. Is it accessible externally? Yes, it is. Okay, great. So we can go to installed operators, all projects, key cloak, create a key cloak, change to the YAML view. Yes, all right. So we hit create. It's thinking. Oh, that's because we're in the wrong project, of course, because I'm terrible at following directions. Let's go to the developer view. I may have already completely hosed this, but that's what we do. You know what? I did already completely host this. So let's do this. Installed operators. We'll go back to SRT because I can't read my own instructions. And I will delete this, uninstall. And now I'll do the right thing, which is put it in the auth project. You would think that I would know how to follow my own instructions. But like I went through the trouble of writing documentation and then promptly didn't follow it. Try this again.
You're just too fast.
Yeah, probably. I'm trying to keep a move on here so we can get some interesting stuff happening. All right, there we go. Now we've got the operator deployed. And if we look at key cloak instances, we see that we have this SRT instance defined. And so the operator is going to see that this thing exists, I hope. And then what it's going to do is start actually deploying single sign-on. There we go. Boom. Look at that. It's like magic. So it has deployed a Postgres database and a key cloak server. And so we're just waiting for these two things to come up. And so while we're waiting for that, we'll take a quick look at the code here. Oh boy, Chrome is not participating today. Okay, so this is using Ruby and Sinatra. Sinatra is a really simple RESTful framework. You tell it what HTTP requests to respond to and how. If you've seen Python Flask, you know, every language has something like this, right? And so what we're doing is we're pulling various environment variables that will tell this application where to find the single sign-on server. And then there's a basic homepage that says, if there is a session with user info, grab the user info and then render the index page. The index page is pretty simple. There's a login endpoint, which basically just immediately redirects you to Red Hat single sign-on. Red Hat single sign-on is set up for OIDC, kind of OAuth flow. So you get a token from single sign-on, which brings us back to our app, which is login after. We pull the code out of the query parameters. Then we process it to get the user's access token and set up the session. And then we send you to the lobby. And then the lobby is doing this horrifically awesome HTTP event stream thing. It's really terrible. But basically, you'll send a chat message to the server, and then everybody is subscribed to this kind of event stream channel, and then they see the chat messages. This is super hackish. Here's all this like OAuth client logic that I had to put in for processing the session and figuring out, is the session still valid? Do we have to send them back? But basically, this is just all standard OIDC, OAuth stuff. And we're using this OpenID Connect Ruby gem, which is community stuff available from lots of folks, and then JWT to deal with web tokens, right? So Keycloak at this point is up. If we look back at the directions and actually follow them, it says get the admin password by looking at the credential SRT SSO secret and then log in as an admin. Kubernetes secrets are a way of storing credentials and secrets and other information. The operator, when it creates this Red Hat SSO instance, it's actually setting up a password for us. We could have defined it, but I just let it do it for me. The username is just admin. The password is whatever it is. So I can just copy that. And if I go back to the topology, I can open the URL for Keycloak, go to the admin console. It's going to ask us for a username, which is just admin. And then the password is the thing that I copied. And hooray, we have logged into Keycloak. And so to recap for people who are just joining, we've deployed Red Hat's single sign-on solution, which is a enterprise capable identity management platform, right? Users, groups, RBAC, all that fun stuff. We're going to use that to provide authentication services for everything in our multiplayer game, right? But all we really did was click a few buttons in OpenShift, right? We created a project, we installed an operator, we wrote a few lines of YAML, and then now we have a fully functional database-backed application service thing going on, right? So that's pretty cool what OpenShift was able to do for us. The next step is to create a realm and then add GitHub authentication to the realm. Creating the realm is pretty easy. We just click this Add Realm button. I have a pre-staged file from a previous episode of exercising this locally and trying to do all this stuff. So I click Create. It imports that JSON, and now we have this realm called SRT, space ring things, not surprising.
Can we show the Twitch audience what's in that file real quick?
Yeah, it's ugly JSON. So let's see. Hey, Derek, welcome. Thanks for joining. Kind of the appear out of the
nowhere. I couldn't get the Bluetooth headset working, so I'm just running off the laptop.
Test. Where did I don't even know where that file lives. Hold on. I have to double check like what it's in my browser history. Multiplayer game design. Okay, that's where I put it. File, open file, multiplayer game design, order by name. I may or may not have done a few things in my days. I just keep like backups forever. So this is just like a bajillion things that
that's a big JSON file.
Yeah, it's humongous JSON file. But honestly, I didn't write this. Like I configured it by pointing and clicking the first time and then just exported it.
Yeah.
but it's all the information about like token configuration and timeouts and, you know, all these different like user roles and all these other things, you know.
Mhm.
Like I said, I didn't write it by hand the first time. I just clicked all the buttons and then exported it. The one thing that I do have to do is when you're dealing with OIDC and OAuth, you're going to get redirected back after you log in if you're using external identity provider. So in our case, we're trying to use GitHub. So when we first hit Red Hat SSO, it's going to have a user password on the left and all the different external IDPs on the right. And so we'll see a GitHub button. And when I click the GitHub button, it's going to send me to GitHub. I try to log in with GitHub. Then it tries to send me back. But the URL that it's going to send me back to is actually configured in GitHub as a provider. So I need to go to GitHub and fix that because my auth application is configured for the last time I did this. So in this case, I've got this callback URL. I need to change this 10F5 to whatever my current cluster is, which is 2FB7. And then the other thing I have to do is I have to import the secret, because for whatever reason, it imports as asterisks, even though it's defined in the JSON file. I guess this is for safety and security. Like, there's no way, like, we don't care what your plain text is. We're not going to let you do it. So anyway, save. All right, the GitHub provider has been updated. That's great. I know this will deploy on OpenShift, this little Ruby app. But for now, I'm not going to do that just for the sake of time. Like, it'll work. I just, you know, it's going to take me an extra 30 seconds. So I'll just do it locally initially. We're pulling all these environment variables, so I need to set them correctly. I've got this little environment dev file, and I got to change my GUID to whatever it was, 2FB7. 2FB7. Save that. Horrifically awesome and super hackish. Yes, those are the keywords of the day. We probably, you know, it would be really fun to write an app that did text to speech or speech to text, piped it through NLP, did word detection, and then hit like the Twitch API or the Restream API to like fire off some Pee Wee Herman-esque word of the day kind of thing.
Oh no.
if anybody wants to do that, man, you just get right after it. I think that would be super awesome. All right, Ruby lobby. Open a tmux session. We're gonna source. I don't even know where that file is. Where's this file? Oh, it's a dot file. There we go. And bundle exec rack up. There's Twitch plugins for that. There's Twitch plugins that actually do the text to speechy or that do the Pee Wee Herman word of the day, or
Well, there's definitely apps that do text to speech. I mean, that's pretty common.
All right, so there is this cool little thing called ngrok that I found that basically will make a tunnel to the public internet through their service and give you like a actually accessible host name. So this actually will work right now, SRT lobby ngrok. So I will paste this in the chat for giggles, but anybody should be able to access it, and it totally opened in the wrong browser window. So there's that.
Welcome to Space Rings Things. It's a work in progress title.
It is a work in progress. Hey man, like I said, horrifically awesome, super hackish. So I click the login button, and I have username or email, which there are no regular users configured, and registration is disabled. There's no link for that. But I can log in with GitHub, and so I click GitHub. It's going to redirect me to GitHub, which you didn't even see anything because I'm already logged into GitHub. So as soon as I hit GitHub, GitHub's like, no, you're cool. I'll send you back. And that sent me back to the application. If we look at the log for the application, oh, we see Jared Sprague's already got logged in and he's got his refresh token. Roddy's in.
Hey, nice. It works.
Yep.
Yeah, and so this
That's
works.
great.
So this is also the little chat thing,
Yeah.
right? And the way that the chat works is super awful. Like it uses a feature of HTML5 and modern browsers. It's not WebSockets. It's like some other active stream thing. And so basically there's just some ugly JavaScript that when you hit enter, it will post. Where is that JavaScript?
I'd be curious to know what this other active stream thing in the browser is.
Oh, I could have.
Not
I think I put the explanation of it in. Yeah. So here's a gist that talks about it. And so if I go to this browser, I forget what it's called. It's the streaming API. So if we look at Sinatra streaming API, introduce the stream helper, stream API. Where? No.
Oh, okay. Actually,
it's a feature of like modern browsers.
Let me see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
streams.
and while you're looking that up, I think it's worth pointing out too, like this isn't like a streamlined Red Hat special demo where we hid all the things for you, right? This is how you would do it for production. Like obviously your production app would have a lot more code in it, but this is how you would do it.
Right. Yeah.
You just
and
also
so
handle failure scenarios.
go ahead. What's that?
You just also handle the failure scenarios instead of just the happy path.
Yeah. There is no error checking or whatever in here. Like this is truly like the first ultra prototypey kind of thing. But the point of this to a certain degree is, you know, I hooked into GitHub because it was convenient, because I didn't want to do user management. But SSO is a full enterprise grade, fully highly available, you know, IDP solution. So if you were operating at the scale of, you know, Blizzard or you know, Epic or whoever, like you could be running this to do all of your user management, but it can also do all the certificate and other things too. And so when we get into it, we're going to try and use this to do like inter-component certificate communication for security purposes, right? Like, you know, service A should talk to service B, but they should be validating that, you know, they're allowed to talk to each other and all that kind of other stuff. So, you know, this is a good foundation for this type of thing. You know, there are services out there that provide this via software as a service, but, you know, your cost on that scales linearly with utilization. Your cost on Red Hat single sign-on is 0 because it's included with OpenShift. So that's one thing to consider, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the Streams API, right? Like this is just a feature of the modern browsers.
Okay.
And so Sinatra uses, so somebody wrote a streaming API for Sinatra that makes use of the streaming feature of browsers. And basically it's using event source in JavaScript to subscribe to this stream. The thing about streams is that they're not bidirectional. So WebSockets are bidirectional.
Right.
Right. So it goes both ways. The stream is basically like just a subscription only, right? So my browser has an event source tied to this endpoint. And so when the Sinatra server barfs something out, it knows what clients are registered and it sends it to all of them. So the caveat to this is that this is non-scalable, right? If I add another instance of this if I deploy this application on OpenShift and scale it out, whichever server you're connected to, that's the only one that you're going to get the messages for. So if we think about our game and it's like, well, do we want to have like, you know, sectors for each place in space where everybody's spaceship is, like, well, it might make sense to have a lobby just for that sector or whatever, but we think there are other ways to do that kind of thing, right? And so yes, very true. Roddy posted in the Twitch chat. Keycloak is the upstream community project for Red Hat single sign-on. And so if you're not currently a Red Hat customer or you just want to play around with it, you don't have OpenShift, whatever it is, you know, you can use Keycloak directly, which is again, that's the community upstream version. So now that we've talked a little bit about single sign-on, and since Derek is on, maybe we'll pivot back to game design. Let me pull up the design document, space ring things design document. You know what? I don't know why I typed that in a search engine expecting it to come up. It's like in my Google Drive. Does anybody have the Google Drive link handy? If not, I'll pull it up from my other browser.
The one that goes to the game design doc that we have?
Yeah, the Google Doc with the game design.
I'll try to find it here.
Yeah, I got it here.
You got it?
Paste it in the chat here.
Okay, cool.
That's open,
Yeah,
right?
you can totally put it in.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's the one.
Oh, the funny thing is,
right?
I can't edit it myself because I haven't shared it with my Red Hat self. And so one of the things we had talked about on the last stream when we were kind of working through, I shouldn't do that. I should zoom this way. Oh, much better. So we came up with this idea for like a battle royale kind of spaceship battle thing. And we talked about a bunch of stuff. And so a couple of things that we added from last time's conversation, and this goes to Derek a little bit. I added the two things. I added permadeath and I added roguelike. And so the reason for permadeath is like, well, if your ship gets destroyed, you probably shouldn't just come back with your ship. Like, you should have to start over, right? Like, that's kind of the whole point of the game, is you're trying to climb to the top. And I talked to Roddy a little bit offline. The way this gets weaved in as a story element is like, you start out in an escape pod like thing, and then you fight other escape pod like things, and your ship gets bigger and bigger, and you collect stuff until you get destroyed, at which point you jump into your escape pod and you start over. Does that make sense?
Katamari, but with weapons.
Is what?
Like Katamari in space with weapons.
I'm not familiar with that game.
Katamari Damacy, you roll around and like
yeah,
stuff
that's
sticks you, and you keep growing and growing and growing.
Okay.
You get bigger and bigger, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fantastically weird game, and when you play it, you will have a WTF face on the whole time and enjoy it.
Katamari?
Yeah.
Katamari Damacy is the one I always think of. Yeah, that's
It is kind of like that, I guess. Yeah. But
that being said, those were definitely gameplay elements we discussed last time.
Did we discuss permadeath?
We did.
Okay.
The one exception is we were talking about carrying over any money you may have earned or resources you may have earned. So while you don't get to keep the ship and everything you put into it, you don't start from zero when you respawn.
I don't know, right? So we'll circle back to that one, because I think the roguelike piece comes into play a little bit. One of the things you had put in here, Derek, was some design and gameplay references, and I think that both Star Control Origins and Star Control 2, they had this like top-down spaceship battles thing going on where, you just kind of fly around and shoot the other person, and your ship has, a couple different weapons. But the thing I liked about what they added in Origins was there's like power-ups, and there's some other elements in the map, if you will, that you can interact with. And the map itself is not infinite, right? So much like a true battle royale, there's some edges to the map. And so if you go outside the edges, you die, right? You're not allowed to go there. So we can constrain the playing area, and then either battle royale style or Star Control style, like, you can pick things up. And so one of the concepts in Star Control is this concept of like precursors, where there's this old leftover technology that's, you can find it. I think Galactic Civilizations had a similar thing, and a bunch of games have this concept. But in the initial, like, you first come into the game, you've never played it before, it's your first time, you're in an escape pod with basically a pea shooter, like trying to just kill other people with pea shooters. If it's a bunch of people with pea shooters, like, that's going to get really lame, maybe really fast. So I don't know, maybe we need some kind of like power-uppy things or something. I don't know.
Power-uppies, yeah. I
Were any
have
of you able to play some of those homework games that I assigned out? The free ones?
I took a look at Radius Raid. I didn't get to play. I didn't get to play it. I've played Star Control. Total Annihilation. I've played before a long time ago. Like I was an early. Oh, is this the original Total Annihilation? Oh, this is the '97 one. Wasn't there a
That would be
new
the original.
remake?
Well, it got open sourced, I believe, right?
Kind of, yeah. OpenTA.
But not the but not the
it's not an open
content.
source
No,
game,
I think
right?
I guess
Yeah.
I'm thinking about a different game. What? There was a game that was like, it was an RTS and you were on a planet, but the planet was like pretty small and like very round, and you
You're
could
talking
build.
about Planetary Annihilation, which was built
Yes.
by
It was a
one of the
later
original
take.
people that did work
Yeah.
on TA. Yeah. Mike Robinson did the AI for that. Yeah, it was a pretty cool one. It's still
Yeah.
it's still out there and still highly played.
Right. Yeah, I played it when it was really early. But anyway, no, I have not gotten to play any of the homework games. So, what were you going to draw parallels to with that?
One of the smaller StarCraft 2 free games, actually. I really like the way that the gameplay is handled, where most of what you're doing as a player is thinking about positioning and maneuvering, and less about like trying to target, right? So especially like if you're gonna play this on a mobile phone, or even like on a desktop, right? Like not having to have those twitch skills as much, but thinking about like upgrading and positioning and what sort of encounters you want to be a part of. To me, that makes it a little more accessible, right? And then that solves the problem of like us having to write code to handle point and click targeting or something like that, right? We can just run that in the sim on the server.
Yeah, I was thinking more like since ultimately it'd be nice to get there. So one of the things about Radius Raid is like your ship has no inertia, so it's WASD control, but like if you press W, you go left instantly and stop instantly, which is sort of unrealistic for what we're trying to achieve with a game that's all about kind of gravity stuff. And so what I was thinking is, Star Control Origins and similar games like that, A and D rotate you, and then W and S are kind of thrust. And so if you think about that, it's basically like you have to turn the ship. Well, wherever the weapon is on the ship, when you press the button to fire, it shoots. And if it's pointed in a certain direction, then the projectile goes where it goes, right? And so to your point, Derek, when the player presses the shoot button, the server's like, okay, this player shot, like, what's the speed of the projectile? Where's it going? Like, is it going to hit anything? Oh yeah, okay, it hit this other player. All right, cool. Like that player takes damage. You see something, So yeah, there's less click to aim. It's more like rotate ship to aim. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's. And the other thing that we can do is, because it gets complicated if you really go into this, but like if the projectiles just move slowly, then we've got more time to process them. If
You get more opportunity to cheat. Yes.
Yeah, but then the caveat to that is like, well, what do we do? Like, how far does a projectile go before it's ineffective? Because then you get into the situation where like, well, is the sector just littered with like dead projectiles, or like, do they just go forever? And do you have to start thinking about avoiding random projectiles? And so then that just like becomes a crappy experience for the end user.
If the rockets, they should self-explode after a while, a short while.
Yeah, or something, right? Or, like
you run out of fuel and go kaboom, or whatever.
Degrade or have a timeout or something.
Yeah. And the bullets only go so far.
So that being said, I think we're still kind of in alignment on like thematics and all this other stuff, but we're sort of at a point where like we need to start thinking about data, like storing player information, storing ship information or whatever. And so one of the things I wanted to do with that is like maybe try using Red Hat Datagrid, which is basically a giant distributed cache.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Like databases are cool, but then you've got to worry about object relational mapping and all this other stuff. Whereas, in the data grid, it's just a key value store. And so we can just serialize everything as basically JSON. And I think there's there's even a way to do protobuf type stuff.
Yeah, and I think thing is too, it's automatically distributed, right? Like it's designed to be a grid and not just an instance.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so
So
if
you
I
get
go
your scale.
back to OpenShift, if we go back to the operator hub, let me make a project called SRT. Did I do that already? I think I did do that. Yeah, okay. So we'll go to SRT. Oh, what? It just disappeared. Oh, I favorited it by accident. All right, we can now install datagrid.
I've used datagrid a little bit in the past.
What's that?
I used datagrid a little bit in the past before when it was called Infinispan, actually. Oh,
Infinispan is the upstream.
Well, Infinispan's the upstream.
yeah.
So this is, again, just like before, we're installing the datagrid operator, which then makes it possible for people to install datagrid instances. It's just thinking right now. Installing. Here we go. All right, so we're going to create a cluster. Yeah. Create an Infinispan. And so replicas, you could set, 3, 9, or however many you wanted, and set a whole bunch of other stuff. We'll just do one for now, but basically, you can fully distribute this thing with lots of replicas. And so, if one instance goes out, you don't have to worry about, losing data or whatever. If you need more throughput, you just create more of them, all that kind of fun stuff. If we look at our topology view here and go to the SRT project, we see the operator, and now it's deploying an Infinispan. Somebody was about to say something.
Yeah, I was thinking about the stateful, how we want to manage the state of the entire game world. If we're using Infinispan, we're probably going to want to have like the local server just broadcasting out the state of what's in that sector, but also persisting at the larger world, which is going to be in datagrid, which we could use datagrid for. Just for performance, just for optimization, we wouldn't want to be broadcasting the state of everybody all the time. Those messages.
Yeah. So I think so what you're describing is sort of like, and maybe there's a game terminology word for it. But
Area
it's
of
like
interest.
Yeah, it's like your local neighborhood kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think what would live in the data grid is like the player's stats and their ship and all the other information that's relevant. And maybe this is broken up across multiple caches within the data grid.
Yeah.
But basically the thing that lives in the data grid is like the end state of your last play session. And so when you join a new play session and you get assigned to a sector, that server fetches the information about you from the data grid, and then it does its own thing while it's doing its thing. And then at the end of that session, or at the end of your, basically at the end of your session. So if you get killed or if you kill somebody, and that server ends, right? Like you won the battle royale of that sector, everybody's data gets sent back into the data grid, like as an update.
Okay. That's a little bit different than what I was thinking about.
Does that make sense? Well, I mean, by all means, like this is up to.
I was thinking of that you could use the data grid to represent the state of the entire game universe at any given time. But each microservice for each sector would be working with just its own state of that sector only, but still persisting it to the data grid all the time.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I don't know that what we said is meaningfully different.
You were, it sounded like what you were saying is you only persist at the end of your session. I'm talking about persisting position game, like player positions, like every server type.
Yeah. So the question is like, is that important, right? Because the player's position within a sector is only relevant to the server that's managing that sector.
Yeah, but if you move to one sector or another, you're gonna have to pull this state of all.
So yeah. So you're bringing up a game design question, which is, if we're sticking with a battle royale-esque theme and this whole like gravity rings kind of meme, can you choose to go to a different sector, or are you stuck in your sector fighting it out until you're the last ship available, at which point now you can go somewhere?
Yeah,
And
okay.
at that point, it's like,
Mhm.
you know, what's going on. So I think
Gotcha.
there may be a requirement for some state that gets transmitted. So one of the things we had talked about was like, well, how do you choose where you go, or like, can you choose where you go, or things like that, right? And so I don't know, like that's a game design decision that will inform, I think.
It might help to like draw this out a little bit. Like what I was picturing was the rings and the sectors, and the center is the gravity well where you get pulled into the more mass you gain.
Right.
Right. And each ring I was picturing having multiple sectors, so that you would be traversing, you would be like crossing over into sectors as you move toward the center. That's what I thought we were.
Yes, but the
designing.
question is, does that happen, you know, given the roguelike given the battle royale theme, does that extend to the like, can you leave a sector before you've vanquished everyone in the sector, I guess is the design question.
To me, so the question you're asking really isn't even that. It's, do we want to force players into conflict? Which I would say the answer to that is yes, because it's a conflict-driven game, right?
Yeah.
So to me, yeah, you need to, you have to fight other players, like regardless of personal, preferences or whatever. I think that is the answer to that question. Yes, you have to fight other players to progress. The only thing that I kind of really want to stick to is player choice on that level of difficulty.
We need to like start a jam board or something, like so we can draw.
Yeah, I'm actually
picture so I can show you what I'm picturing, and we can.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a way to do that in Zoom. If there is, I don't know how to do it. So I was actually going to fire up a Google document. What do we have to use for that?
I know we have a jam board, but you would have to share it, and I would give, if you gave us a link to it and shared it on your screen, we could like draw on it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like what. I guess it's a Google drawing.
I think it's just called Google Jamboard.
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
That's if you're using Meet though. Oh, Jamboard.
Yeah.
I don't have a jam
there's a Red Hat account for this. Oh,
well, yeah, but if we do it that way,
share this with us, and now we can all draw on it together like a whiteboard.
Yeah. So hold on. Let me share. Get the link, change to anyone with the link. Anyone with the link on the internet can view. No, anyone can edit. All right, I'm gonna send this via the internal chat. Oh gosh. I'm gonna paste it in the gaming channel.
Okay.
Just for ease of use.
Yes.
And so when you get in, share it with yourself so that I can turn off the internet. Can edit kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So that's done. That's done. All right. Here's our jam. Circle. Can I draw hexagons? Can't draw hexagons. I can draw diamonds.
All right, shared it with myself. So let me try.
Sweet.
Oh yeah, I can draw stuff.
Yeah, so this
That's
is,
how
I'm
you're
sort of
drawing
drawing the vision of sector rings, right? So
Okay, so you're.
hang
I
on.
mean, while
It'll
you're
make
doing
sense
that,
in
I'll
like in 20
show
more
you what I
seconds.
was thinking.
That's the
I'll do
center
like
one.
a mini map kind of over here. The rings.
There we go. So these are, if you think about it in terms of game sectors, right? Is there a way to color these or fill them in? Oh God, this is really frustrating. No, I want this one in the center. There we go. Duplicate order.
I'm drawing.
So this is
sector.
ring 1, and then this is ring 2. Yeah, you and I are drawing basically the same thing, right?
Yeah, you're.
This is
Yeah,
1. This is 2.
yeah. You're
and
just
then-
drawing it in a diamond.
And grid. Yeah.
And I don't think it necessarily matters like the shape of the area, right? The gameplay is going to decide that. I don't think technology-wise there's necessarily any restrictions, right? Besides like the largest space that a device could handle,
Yeah.
or that the
As a
server could
sector.
handle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we're streaming it to the client, right, it doesn't matter. So they could be circles, they could be squares, they could be hexagons, they could be oblong rectangle things.
The shape is.
Yeah, I mean, they
more-
don't
the
even
shape is
need
more
to
fit the
exist.
theme
I
of the
think it's
game.
more we're
It's-
just trying to make a mental model of
Exactly.
what it is.
And-
But the point is that every ring, the more rings there are, the more sectors there are. Like each ring doesn't have an equal number of sectors,
Right.
if that makes any
It
sense.
grows as it goes outward.
Yeah.
And so I think the point is like if you as a player, if you end up here, right, like you get dropped here,
Mhm.
can you choose to go here, or do you have to destroy everybody in your sector before you can then move to
So
the next ring?
So in our doc, didn't we talk about like getting attracted toward the middle if you're.
Well, that was kind of the thing.
More
Like
mouse.
you would destroy a bunch of people, you pick up a bunch of junk, you strap it on like reavers, and then you're heavy, so you kind of you have to go in. Like you can't go out, basically. So like
Right.
this direction is no, you can't do that.
You're too massive. Like you can't go out, but you could go closer in. Like but
Right.
then you
Yeah.
could-
So you can do this and go here.
But you would be facing all of the massive ships with all the big guns.
You'd be facing whoever's bigger than you at that point.
Yeah.
So
Right. So
but this takes us away from,
yeah.
to a certain extent, I don't know.
So what I was thinking was we let players move inward, like we just said, but they can't go outward, and they get pulled inward the more massive they get. And
right.
they can get pulled, like if they killed a bunch of people really fast in their sector and their mass hits the threshold, they're going to get pulled out of their sector.
Sure.
into a
No,
more
I
massive
agree.
sector. Yeah. And so what I was saying about the data grid, so the data grid would encompass all the state of the world. But the microservice of your neighborhood would only be broadcasting the state of this one sector, but still persisting it out into the data grid all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. The question is, why does the sector need to persist its data into the data grid
Because when
all
the
the time?
player crosses over, they're going to have to get all the state.
So that brings us back to the question of, can a player move to a different sector voluntarily?
Yeah, we just said that if they're light, you can go inward, but you're just going to be hitting more bigger ships.
Sorry,
So,
let me rephrase. Go ahead, Derek.
What I would like to see is, regardless of the shape here, right, at all times, all players are moving towards the innermost sector. No matter where you start in here, you're moving towards the innermost sector. And that's your default velocity or whatever. The larger you get, the faster you move in that direction. And now that direction doesn't have to be to the left or to the right or whatever. It could always be up, whichever way, right? Orientation doesn't matter. But whatever way, all players in the entire area are moving towards that same direction. velocity affected by mass. And then any other additional movements they make are on top of that. So you can think of it as like airplanes in a jet stream, right? If you have a bunch of airplanes in a jet stream, they're all going the same direction. And then their thrust from their jet engines, right, is going to change. It's going to be a modifier on top of that. It's additional velocity. So all of the gameplay happens with everybody collapsing essentially inwards in a specific direction towards each other. And at some point, you will have to destroy all other players because you won't be able to escape them, right? If it's just the two of you, right, you two are going to be moving towards that position where inevitably there will be conflict, a player will win, and then you're on to the next section.
So
I like what you're saying. I don't understand how to implement it as a game mechanic that doesn't just make players really sad.
yeah,
Because if they're
It takes
always
away the
being
control.
pulled inwards,
right.
then even the weenies are going to end up in the center and just get crushed.
The one
If they
thing,
don't,
yeah, exactly.
if they don't kill other people, if they don't take out other players fast enough and get enough gear fast enough, they, with that design mechanic, they end up in the center and then they just get annihilated
Yeah,
because
and
they
the
can't
other
destroy
thing-
anything in the center.
The other thing too is that
Not necessarily, right? I mean, yes, we want that to happen no matter what because it's a conflict-driven game, right? You can't be a player in this game and just avoid conflict the whole time, right? But your control over the rate at which you enter conflict is going to be the direction in which you push your vehicle, right? Which you push your spaceship. So if you're someone who's constantly putting full thrust against that inertia, right, you're going to be the last player to arrive in the center. But that also reduces your chances to pick up additional resources to improve your ship. So you'd be gambling that the other players that have made it to the center are weak enough for you to handle at that point, right? And that's where you still have that player agency and choice.
if it's, yeah,
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that leads us to an issue of maximum number of players in a sector.
Which, yeah, the answer to that is what can we handle, right? What can the architecture of our game, especially if we're gonna like write something on like Node or something, right? Performance-wise, cluster-wise, like what can each one of these individual microservices handle? And that's our limit, right? And we can always scale it up in the future as we optimize our code or, you know, improve it, that sort of thing. The second answer to that too, of course, is play it. What's fun, right? Is
Yeah,
10,000 players all in the same space fun? Maybe
probably
not. Maybe
not.
it is. Yeah, maybe the number is 50,
that ends up
right?
being like the shipment level in Call of Duty that's out right now, where it's like 16 players, 8x8, or like 10 versus 10, but the game space is like you can pretty much see across the entire map from every point on the map, and so it's just you're just getting killed constantly and respawning instantly. It's not. It's some people are into it and it's fun, but like I can see how, you know, extreme number of players in one sector at one time is potentially not no bueno. But so you, Derek, seem to be aligning with Jared's trope of like, yes, you can just pilot your ship around kind of wherever, and so at any moment you may end up in it
you could move to the center if
devalues
you
to a
want.
certain extent
Yeah.
an individual sector. Because at that point, if you're just getting pulled in all the time and like you can just kind of power your way out to a certain degree, depending on how heavy you are, what is the point of a sector at that point, other than a construct for us to give servers, you know, something to do from a dividing the space perspective? I don't think a
It's-
sector at
it's
that point is a game
essentially-
element.
The gravity that is in each sector, right, is an implementation of the circles that you might find in other battle royales, right? It's the gameplay space restriction mechanic. And so regardless, inevitably, and again, this will have to be like what feels fun, right? Maybe it's 2 minutes, maybe it's 6 minutes, you know, a shorter time to me is better, especially for something that'll be played on a cell phone. Inevitably, you will be into conflict with every other player in your sector. You just get to decide that rate by choosing, you know, are you going to go towards the gravity well and other players or away from them? And if you're going away from them, then, you know, within 2 minutes or whatever, you'll still be drawn into the conflict and either be destroyed or advance to the next sector and then get to, you know, start over again.
Yeah. So the question I'm asking is, if I'm the yellow dot, can I actually do this from a movement perspective?
I think you could. Yeah,
Yeah, I would say no.
yes. I would say yes. I would say why not?
So the no is more of a battle royale-esque.
Well, no, in a battle royale, you can run around the outside of the circle.
So here's the question, Jared, honestly, which is how do you communicate these sectors to the player, right? Is this like we want to have a predefined map that maybe every map has like an asteroid belt or an end of a nebula or something, and if you leave that space, you enter, a transitionary area where you don't encounter players until you start encountering them again, right? Then you're opening up a lot of different like communication questions to help the player understand what they're doing. And this might be a matter of game design, but I'm always for like make it simple first, right? Solve the gameplay mechanic that is in front of you, and don't add additional ones on unless you need to solve another problem.
I don't
Like,
see
what is the
why
problem you're
that
trying to solve with
mechanic
this
is any
mechanic?
different than the mechanic you were proposing from simplicity point of view. They're both just different mechanics.
So the problem that I was trying to solve with the sector mechanic is effectively like, when you enter as the initial time, the first time you're playing, like you need something to do, and you don't want to start in the center when everybody else in the center is like amazing, and so you start sort of somewhere else. But by the same token, it's like we didn't want to allow them to leave because we wanted them to battle it out with other people in that sector until they got heavy enough that it made sense for them to go somewhere else. I don't particularly care either way, right? So
They don't
Derek,
have to be able
what
to
it sounds
cross
like
over.
you're
It doesn't
describing is
matter.
essentially you start somewhere, and then you're getting sucked in sort of no matter what, and to a certain extent, as long as you're light enough, you can kind of like stay where you are ish, but eventually you get pulled in. The other caveat to that is like, when enough players are in the game, you kind of have to start everybody like really far out. So if you look at Jared's picture in the upper right, where you've got 3 rings or 4 rings or 10 rings, like the newest players start the furthest out, but they're theoretically the same weight as people who are closer in, because we needed to start them further out so that players who were already playing were, you know what I mean? Like
The scalability you're talking about, like
no, not scalability. It has nothing to do with game technology. It has to do with like, we wanted an infinitely scalable universe that grew as the number of players grows.
Yeah.
Which requires some kind of design mechanic so that it makes sense that when new players enter the game, they don't.
It expands.
Well, both that the available space expands,
Right.
but that it makes sense who they're interacting with, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, they want to be on they want to be in a sector with people of equal mass when they join.
Well, yeah, so that's one aspect of it. But say the game has been going on for a while and you've got 10 rings, right? And so new players are starting out at ring 10, and somehow, some schlub who started early on, like, avoided getting sucked in to the center. And so they're sitting at ring 3. And so now the person that fought their way from 10 down to 3 is really big. And there's this like tiny little schlub who's still hanging out in ring 3. Like, they're just going to get wiped out. But
that's
similarly,
his choice to stay there.
Huh?
That's his choice to stay there, though.
Understood.
Not,
but if that
don't
person
collect
started
mass.
at ring 3 and fought their way into the center, they only could theoretically get so big because they've only fought through a few rings of folks. So somebody that starts later out at ring 10, they had, a lot more chance to gather mass. So by the time they get to the center, they're way bigger. So it's almost like you're penalized for starting the game early. So how do you ensure that somebody who started early can be big enough to accommodate somebody that started late who had more opportunity to gather mass? Derek,
I don't know if that's
we do it as a battle royale, like kind of design. A session like starts and everyone starts equal and then it has a beginning and an end. And so everyone would start at there would be no one people starting later than others. Everyone starts at the same time. That's how battle royales work. Like the game begins, everyone joins. I don't think
Yeah,
you can
if
join
you
a battle
take
royale,
the
right?
if you take the
For each
trope,
section.
go ahead, Derek.
Well, for each section. So, I mean, that's like a question of what does the power curve of the game look like, and what is the progression mechanic, right? And to me, the answer to that is there's always a set number of rings to the center, right? Like that drawing in the top right. Like if we decide, power creep wise, like there are 5 rings to the center, you must always go through 5 battles before you fight, in a battle that has people that have fought other 5 battles, right? And at that point, it's no longer about like what additional mass you can put to your ship. You've hit the mass limit. You're in the center of the galaxy or the center of all the rings or whatever, right? You're at your mass limit. You can't go any further. Maybe it's because you fall into a black hole, whatever, But regardless, you've hit that power level. And so now it's all about tactics. It's all about how you've built up your ship over that time period, right? And at that point, you've hit that top level, right? Once that battle's complete, congrats, you've won. Winner, winner, chicken dinner, right? You have the center. And whether that means you stay there and you continue fighting those top tier battles, right? Or you get destroyed, right? That's up to you playing the game.
So
Yeah.
And to
Cypher
that
in the
point-
chat has an interesting idea. He's like, what if there's a total mass in existence, but if you start earlier, you get more mass more quickly, and if you start later, it just takes you longer to get that same amount of mass. So it's like the mass that you get, agreeing with Derek, there's like some maximum theoretical limit. And the mass that you acquire is proportional to how far you started away. So if you started far away in ring 10, you don't get a lot of mass as you move to ring 9, and you get a little more as you move to ring 8, so that the person that started at ring 3 and ended up in ring 1, they're super heavy at ring 1. And the person who started in ring 10 and ended up in ring 1 theoretically is the same heaviness. They just accumulated weight at a lower, they accumulated mass at a lower rate.
See, but if we have a static set of rings, we don't have to worry about what ring you start in. Like if we have 5 rings or whatever, this is 4 rings. When you start, you always start at the outside.
Yeah. So
And then
this goes back
in.
to a conversation we had last month about persistent universe versus maybe not. And so if we stick with the literal battle royale trope, then the universe is not persistent. It exists only for the duration of one game, at whatever scale. And then at the end of that game time, it's over. My thought is more interesting is like more like an MMO where, you can
It's
jump in and jump out of the
time. Like,
huh?
It's ongoing all the time.
Yeah, like basically the universe just exists for forever. And
I like that.
at some point in the future we might have 10 million players. And
No, I like
1,000 rings. And the question is like, is there a way to still make that fun? Like that's a more interesting design challenge.
I think that's
to
very
me.
fun.
So hold on.
I appreciate
There's an assumption here that I want to challenge real quick.
Sure.
And it's, why do we need 1,000 rings if we scale up, right? Why can't it always be 5 rings? And just the number of sessions in a ring is what scales.
Yes, that I absolutely agree with you, Derek. So what I was thinking with this model, it's basically like think of it like a fractal pretty much. If people keep joining, like millions of people keep joining, you just keep adding more and more and more and more and more and more sectors on the outer ring. Does that make sense? So you always have the same number of rings, but the sectors themselves scale up as millions of people join. But just like a fractal, think of it that way. It's a good way of picturing it.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. And that way you could scale infinitely pretty much because there's no space. Visually, like I could probably fill this thing up with sectors.
Well, my only question again is if you look at this like sort of yellow line where you can move between 2 sectors, like if you have a fixed number of rings and as the number of players increases,
I'd retract this. We don't have to do this like that. So let's say you can't move side to side, but you can only move inward based on your mass. Or like, well, I'm sorry. If you get more massive, you're going to get always pulled inward.
Your
Well,
thrust power can never overcome your mass. And so at a certain mass level, you're going to get sucked in to the next lower ring, if that makes any sense. Like you can
Yes.
power your
Right.
way to the outer edge of the ring at a given mass level, because the other thing you don't want is like, from a combat perspective, maybe we do want this, I don't know. If I start to go in towards the center to then turn around and try and do something to like attack somebody that's closer to the center, can I just not ever get any further away? Like that, I don't know. That's going to be like a fun decision.
No.
Like, we have to
So
figure that
I
out.
mean, yeah, to me this is like I can do it like a quick coded demo or something, like just write something in JavaScript to kind of show you. But when I was talking about like concept of like jets in a jet stream, right? The reason it's so appealing to me is because if you're a passenger in those jets, you don't notice that you're in the jet stream because all the other jets are moving relative to you. They're all already moving in that same direction. So as a passenger, the movement, right, the complexity of the scenario is greatly simplified. You're just in a regular combat, right? And just for some reason, right, and this is something that's going to be pretty transparent to players, you're going to see ships in the far off distance, if you could, right, slowly moving closer to you,
You see
even though they're
your
still headed in that same
frame of
direction.
reference
Right?
moving as a group on the radar, say.
Yeah.
Like if you had a little radar up in your right hand, you'd
I
see
like-
your group moving together, and maybe the next sectors becomes visible as you approach the edge of your sector. You can see like the dots, in the other sector getting closer, and you're moving as a group.
Well, and that's kind of a thing too, is like you don't need to have an edge of a sector, right? You don't need to really show anyone the edge. Once you blow up that last ship, right, then maybe you get accelerated into the next sector or whatever. But movement can be a consistent thing, right? Like this is a mechanic essentially that we don't have to implement in the way that we're talking about it. We just have to communicate it to the player in the way that we're
It has to
talking
be
about it.
visually obvious.
I would
not
actually
technical.
implement this very different than what we're talking about. It would be a theater trick
Like,
essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But the gameplay
move the
mechanic
background,
would be
and you move everything else by them.
Tech Jedi is talking about maybe we haven't talked like about fuel at all. So maybe there's some kind of fuel cost depending on the way in which you're moving, and by destroying other ships, you pick up fuel again. And so maybe there's a game mechanic later on that we can introduce about balancing fuel utilization, like thrust costs fuel, and so you could power your way all the way back out to the back end of the sector, the outer edge of where you are, so to speak. But then you might be out of fuel at that point. So all you can have is gravity pull you back in, and all you can maybe do is rotate and shoot and hope kind of thing. So that could be an interesting kind of thing.
I like
So
that.
I like the game design discussion, but at some point we have to get back to like, okay, we have a data grid. What does our initial data structure look like?
But I think
We do, yeah. And I do want to underscore all of this with that same question that I asked earlier that we should all be thinking about every time we talk about mechanics, which is what problem are you trying to solve by introducing this mechanic?
I don't know that we're trying to solve any problems right now. And that's why I think we're sort of at the point where it's like, well, all right, let's get some basic data structures figured out and then like get some dots moving around. And I want to leave some time for Roddy to do his demo because he's got a demo of dots moving around and colliding, which is somewhat important. But like, other than where the dots are, and Roddy, maybe that's just where we start, right? Like where the dots are, right? Like, we need a JSON data structure, or at least a description of some data values that we can then, start putting into the data grid.
Yeah,
I
they
think
need to be
we
in
can-
a sector. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if we're gonna move on to something else, can we just underscore what we decided from a design point of view, which is I think we all want to agree like a static set of rings with an
With
n
an
number of
increasing
sectors
number
per
of
ring.
sectors per ring.
Yeah. And then everyone starts at the outer ring. When you join, you always start at the outer ring in a sector that has other players in it. And then you move towards the center, either like automatically, like a slow pull, like Derek is saying, or you reach a certain threshold and get transported to the next sector because your mass reached a certain point. But
Sorry, I'm reopening.
Oh, and then the other
document
part, the other
so that I
design
can
thing
edit
was,
it.
I think this is going to be easier and more fun if we do as a persistent ongoing game and not a discrete start and end battle royale style.
Sorry, I can finally now write something. So I'm just like throwing bullets at the end of the document because I don't have a better place to put them right now. So this is, we're going to say fixed number of rings, sectors scale with number of players.
Yeah. All
Wow,
players started
that's-
the outer ring.
So there's one sector 0 though in the middle, right? So what's the win condition given that it's persistent?
There's no win condition. It's just king of the hill, pretty much. Who can?
This is, yeah,
have
it's
the most
basically
points
like,
and-
Get to the center and hold it.
Yeah.
Until you
yeah,
die.
basically, yeah, it's like hold
Held
the
the
room
center
kind
for
of
so
thing.
long. You
Yeah,
have a leaderboard for that, right?
Exactly. You have a
Longest living
leaderboard
person.
for who survived the longest and
Right.
racked up the
How
most
quickly they were able to get there and hold the center, then how long they're able to
yeah,
hold
we
it.
can come up with stats
You know?
later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I like
Basic-
about that too is it does open us up opportunities for designing an end game, right? Like having this sort of like very restricted, limited set of in-game conditions allows us to design out from there and do some cool stuff with it later, not now.
Yeah, sure. I know these aren't mechanics, but I'm going to call them core mechanics. For now. Okay, data structures. Wow, that's why 21.
And when you do get the chance to allow edit access to that doc, I wanted to get into those design pillars.
Oh, give me a sec here. I will do that. Send me whatever. Do you want me to share it with your Red Hat email address, or do you want a personal email address on it?
I already requested it with the Red Hat email address.
Oh God, that means I have to go into my Google and maybe see the request. Sorry. Sorry, I have a lot of email. Derek Reese, request for access. I think I can accommodate.
Perfect.
All right, I think you have it now. If you refresh. Wait, it's still thinking. I don't know if it's my internet that's being horribly slow. Oh, okay. I just clicked the send button, so hopefully that'll work for you.
No purple.
We're still streaming, so that's good. Figure I need to check that every once in a while. Sorry, Ria, no purple. I know you asked for that a long time ago.
Ria loves purple.
So core data structures, right? So one of the things I talked to Roddy about was, since datagrid is just key value pairs, we may have more than one cache, which is like a database, if you want to call it that, right? Yeah. Since we're using GitHub for auth right now, and GitHub enforces unique IDs on GitHub, we can just use the player's GitHub ID as their key anytime we store values for them. Seems simple enough, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow, why is that so slow? It's fun. And so I do, to go back to a question that Jared had asked earlier, do we need to store their position constantly in the data grid? I kind of don't like, that's going to be really chatty if we have to do that.
I mean,
even if it's only XY, like.
But perhaps the sector that they're in.
Yeah, I mean, so the server, or like the state of that whole universe has to be known somewhere.
Yeah, because what happens if the player gets disconnected and comes back, right? Do you
Yeah.
want them to start exactly where they were or just in the sector?
Well, if a player gets disconnected and comes back, they're probably going to start over again completely.
But we could say to start
Yeah.
the same sector. You left off in
Let,
sector 9.
let's worry about the game
Transferring you
mechanic
back.
for that later.
Right? Yeah, that's yeah. But
Yeah, because like, you know, if the universe is persistent, players should be able to leave. Like, you know, you can't ask them to play for forever. Like, they should be able to leave with their current status, and then come back with their current status. So it is like
Right.
disconnect just counts as disappear. So yeah, I mean,
so the whole and another thing when joining too, think of this like when a new player connects, the server is going to have to decide which sector has the appropriate number of players to place them in, because they don't want to get placed into an empty sector or a full sector, or might have to create a new sector based on there's no like all the sectors are full, so it needs to spin up another one, or merge them or whatever, split them. So in order for that to happen, the state of all sectors has to be known. And that's why I think everything needs to be in datagrid. But when you're broadcasting to just the players in the sector, you obviously don't need to be broadcasting the state of the universe, just your own sector to the other players.
yeah, I'd be concerned that we're going to crush the data grid if we have 10,000 players whose XY coordinates are constantly being updated.
I mean, that lots of games do that. And if we should be able to solve that problem, if this is supposed to be like an MMO, that's what MMOs are doing. So
But that's a question, right?
Yeah.
In an MMO, is there, other than, you know, in World of Warcraft, is there some central database that knows the exact location in the universe of every player at every moment?
for Azeroth, not for separate realms. For a single realm, yes.
And how
Not
many
for-
players can be in a realm at a given time?
Tens of thousands, probably. I don't know exactly how many in a single realm.
I mean,
But
I
think
guess
of
it's
like
worth
E-
it. I guess
think
it's
of
worth
like
a try until we kill it, right? Like at
E
some point
Online.
we'll knock it over. And
Yeah, and I think if
well,
E-
the other thing, I guess, but the other thing is like, okay, it's a grid. We can scale it. It's eventually consistent. And so the real question is like, how long does it take that data when we're chatty to persist to all the instances, and who's talking to which instances, and stuff like that.
and I think
So
that's
XY,
why that's what data grid is meant to do, right? It's meant to distribute that data across a wide grid of stuff in a fast way.
well, but it does it as eventual consistency, not instantaneous consistency.
It's not instantaneous, but it doesn't need to be instantaneous. Only needs to be instantaneous in your own neighborhood.
Sort of. Right? Because like, you know, if I move to a different, if I end up needing to be served by a different game server because I've changed my location,
Mhm.
then at some point the data has to be guaranteed to be in the new grid instance I might end up talking to. But because, you know, and that's going to depend on the game server. I mean, maybe Roddy, maybe you know the difference, but when you're talking to the data grid restfully inside OpenShift, you have no idea which instance you're going to talk to.
Yeah, I think that's
Because
right.
each request goes through the service layer, and unless it's doing some kind of like tracking of source, you know, you're just getting round robined.
I think by default that would be the behavior. But there's other clients you could use, like the Hot Rod client.
So the
I
other-
don't know that does REST, right?
Hot Rod, yeah.
Well, it doesn't. It's a native
Yeah.
protocol.
So
But the question is like, well, I should say the question. I mean, the Hot Rod client does something interesting about how it talks, how it finds who it's talking to. Kind of.
yeah, I think it would be up to the game server to have some smarts about what data is where.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a good question. Is there a Node.js Hot Rod client?
Probably not. maybe now we can look. But yeah, that might determine the backend we're using. If we're gonna use DataGrid as our persistent store, then we need to make sure the language we're using has a
Well, as of
library
2018,
for it.
the Node.js client .6 was released. How do I actually find it? There it is. Here's an example.
Yeah, and I think on paste one in chat
JS
here.
client was updated in March.
All right, cool,
JavaScript client over the Hot Rod Wire protocol. Look at that.
right on.
Fancy. All right. So XY coordinates, current sector. What else? I mean, I guess
Current
this is enough
mass.
for now.
Oh, we're talking about the data structure. Okay, for
Yeah.
the player. Okay.
I mean, that's enough for a start, but like we
the
need to
mass,
talk their mass. Yeah,
the
exactly.
mass of them needs to be an important thing. Their velocity, probably.
For the sake of simplicity for now, we'll have just weapon power as just one stat,
Health,
and then,
health.
you know, hit points basically
health
as
hit
another stat.
points. Yeah.
There we go. Oh, Derek, you can just use editing mode, man. You have to use suggesting mode. Just rock it out. Sorry, let me. Player. There we go. So keys by GitHub ID. Sorry, I gotta put all these in. Come on. All right. Roddy, do you want to share your cool
Sure.
demo at this point?
Yeah, I should be able to do that.
All right, so I'm gonna stop the share here.
All right,
Just
make sure
gonna
I
do
move
some weird things to the stream for sure.
I'll move off the Zoom stream, so I'm not streaming us streaming.
Yeah.
That's probably less than useful. All right. So,
that's a different game.
yes, indeed. All right. So let's find the right window.
Gosh, I look so pink. I need to fix the white balance in my situation here.
Oh, and Roddy, before you
I
start
promise
your
I
demo,
haven't been drinking.
Yep. That's right.
I was trying to find the
Much.
code for your demo and the.
Oh, so speaking of that, right. So essentially, I've been going through and making sure that it's appropriate to be open sourced and has the appropriate licensing and all that kind of stuff,
Okay.
right? So I've completed the server, which I've had in my own repository here under CMS test, which you can probably see there now on the left. I'm just going to make it public. Make public and type the name. Yes, I understand. Oh, my password.
Show us all the passwords.
All right. So in theory, you should now be able to see, along with everybody else, the repository.
In the Red Hat game dev org?
Nope, in my own at the moment. Myself
Oh, okay.
and Eric were talking about that, whether we'll want to move it over, but we'll need to decide whether this is going to serve as the basis
Yeah.
or
Okay.
not, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about the technologies that you've got in there right now?
Sure, yeah. So I added in a README here. So basically, I wrote this server starting about 8 years ago in the fall of 2012. So it goes back a ways. And around that time, I'd seen some game servers using the ActiveMQ broker and C++ clients. So I had this idea of integrating an ActiveMQ broker for messaging, a C++ client on the back end for the server, so that I could use Box2D for physics. And then on the front end, use .NET and integrate a .NET messaging client into Unity 3D. So basically take a bunch of open source tech, integrate it all, and create a multiplayer game server, right? So over the course of a few months, I put together CMS test, which is like the CMS comes from the C++ messaging system for ActiveMQ. And then as well, then I put together the Unity side here, right? So basically what I'm going to show here is like you can see here on the right-hand side, I've got like a pretty basic tmux session set up. I don't have that pretty power bar thing that Eric had earlier. So in this window here, basically, I've just got the broker going. So this is like, go to Apache, activemq.apache.org, go to downloads, download ActiveMQ 5.16, and out of the box, it'll have something called a STOMP protocol port open on 61613. So STOMP is like simple text-oriented messaging protocol, right? So by default, it has that out of the box. So we're just going to start up the broker here. It just takes a second. So then we'll switch back to session 1 here. And so then I'm just going to run my CMS test, which is built from this repository that I just opened up. And basically what it is, essentially, it's a wrapper around Box2D. So it starts up a world simulation. And then basically it has a messaging client there that connects to the broker on a specific like publish subscribe mechanism, what's called a topic. And when the player joins, it starts firing player simulation updates at the broker. Okay, so we just set it up, so it's running. So then the next thing is, of course, we need some clients, right? So I've got this client in Unity, which we can't open the code for yet because I found some proprietary stuff in there with regards to the multi-threading that I need to fix up. But essentially, I took the .NET messaging client, integrated into Unity. Both sides use protocol buffers, STOMP protocol. They both meet at the broker to get the world simulations out of the game server and to get the input from the keyboard into the game server. So let's just start up a few instances here. All right, so let me move them over one by one here. Start up another one. Start up another one. So we can see here I'm only using localhost, which is, not that interesting, but at the same time, it's going through the full TCP/IP stack. So the fact that it's on localhost is somewhat irrelevant, and the server,
Yeah, it could be anywhere.
Right, could be anywhere, right? And if it's in OpenShift, you're going to be going either through host path or through the router or something of that nature, right?
Is STOMP a binary protocol or is it RESTful?
So STOMP is not binary, but it's not RESTful either. It's a messaging protocol, right?
I'll rephrase the question. I guess I saw that I didn't get the answer I wanted. It said I didn't get an answer that explains what I wanted.
Okay.
So it's not HTTP.
That's correct. It's independent.
It's some
TCP.
socket communication
That's right.
protocol.
Exactly.
Does it? Can it do SNI?
Good question. Because at the time I wasn't too concerned about security, right? So the thing is that
you're sharing your Zoom again.
Oh yeah, I just passed by there. Sorry.
Well, not from a security perspective, from a router perspective, right?
Right. That's right. You do need SNI to get through HA proxy. That's
well,
correct.
unless you
bypass.
If we deployed it in a public cloud like Amazon or Google or Azure, we could use a load balancer service,
right,
which would use one of their load balancers, which would probably allow us to do a binary protocol.
Yep.
I'm using the term binary protocol in the sense of it's pure socket communication, not
which
HTTP.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's not HTTP.
STOMP
Yeah,
SNI.
A lot better.
So yeah, I mean, the fact that STOMP is chosen in this case is somewhat irrelevant in a way, because at the time STOMP was chosen so that I could get easily in and out of web browsers.
Yeah.
But each of the clients involved, the CMS and NMS clients, also support OpenWire. And OpenWire is an open but not standard format, like not ISO standard, for example. that is completely binary, and also does full TLS, which also should be SNI as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to join in here. So I added a little background here today that I got from opengameart.org. The guy by the name is copyright Ivan Voirol. Just looking for credit. And if anybody may notice the little hexagon there, I got from
that's the
our,
pot escape hexagon.
that's the pot escape hexagon. Yeah, you got it. So I borrowed that there earlier today. Okay. So we each get a unique ID, which I've trimmed to be 8 characters. These guys are moving around. Each guy, as I join in here, get them out of the center because So the tricky part is that in the top left in the screens where they're moving around, there's actually a leave button behind the grid. I didn't have time to fix that earlier today. So, all right, so we got all the guys moving around here. So let's we're building up some momentum. Bang. We got kind of our like 8-ball pool scenario going on here, right?
Oh,
And just
that's
bouncing
awesome.
around, right?
So,
So it's all like Box 2D simulated in the background, applying forces to the rigid bodies. They've got friction and all that kind of stuff
Do they have
you can
gravity?
set on them, right? So the thing is, it does have gravity if you turn it on, right?
Okay.
But then I think there's a direction that you can set there. So, so he's getting out of the screen here.
I got questions, Roddy. Like, so is this happening over a socket stream, right?
Yes, it's happening through the broker, right? So both of them essentially, it is over a socket. So the broker has port 61616 open and is listening for Stomp protocol on that port. And then the broker, because of the way it works, you can set up queues or topics.
Yeah.
And the way in which that works, queue means it goes to one particular consumer. Topic means it goes to many consumers in a publish subscribe type mechanism, right?
And it's bidirectional. The socket is bidirectional, like because the players can put a message on the queue.
That's correct.
Which gets picked up by the server and broadcast out to everybody.
Right. So then it's not just a raw socket. It's let's see if I can get the right window
I just
here.
did a Google search for I did a search for Stomp JavaScript, and there's a Stomp over WebSocket client.
Oh, so there you go.
But I don't know if that means it speaks quote unquote binary. If that makes any sense.
And when you're moving the position there, Roddy, like you're just setting the command of the direction you want to go, right? And then the server.
Yeah, it's WASD, right? So then basically, so here I've got up on the screen here now. So the way this is set up, we've got like publish, subscribe, topics set up for different things, right? So we've got one, which is the world simulation. So that's where all the updates go out to the clients. And then we've got a command in. So that's where all the input comes in from the different clients. And each client then has a UUID associated with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then internally that maps into, let's just pop open the code here. Let's see if I can show it right quick. So this is the C-line view, C-line being the JetBrains C++ IDE.
Oh, okay.
Right, so if we see down the left here, so basically we've got like a main server loop here. And basically like we've got a message consumer, command queue, we have a world simulation, and then we have like an update to box duty essentially, right?
Yeah.
And then basically after we do the box duty tick and update, and then we dispatch the current state back out, right? So it's, in a way, it's pretty dumb. Like if you look at the Gaffer on Games YouTube video where he goes through like from GDC, where he does that talk where he starts like with a fully authoritative server and he rolls around the ball and all the stuff sticks to it. And he looks at all the different kind of latency involved and how much bandwidth it takes. Like that's the foundation then for, deltafying the updates, making them as small as possible.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff, right?
Of course.
So the one good thing that this does do though, is that the data itself is packed in the protocol buffers, which is a really efficient binary serialization format.
Ooh, that's
so we're not just doing JSON like big wide text stuff, like it's all protocol buffers. So like a lot of that, I wouldn't say a lot of that, one step of that is done for us because it's already packed really tightly. But then we'd want to go the next step and then like delta fog.
Deltify it. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Do we need
And
to
how
send
long
this?
is
Do we
that?
not? Does this client need it? Are they in the area of interest?
Right.
All that kind of stuff, right? So like we'll look at, for example,
Yeah, and so
That's
this is
super
where
cool.
this is where JDG is gonna be difficult because it doesn't, at least with REST, it doesn't support patch. I don't know if Hot Rod supports patch.
gotcha.
And so we might actually need some microservice in between to figure out like what
How to
data
match
to
the data.
send to the client. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Maybe we, yeah, I don't know. We can think about the universe persistence, but maybe it doesn't need to be at the real-time interval that the game loop is running on. That can be synchronized.
Well, and that's kind of the point that I was trying to get back to about like not sending all the updates all the time.
Yeah. I think that might
to-
be okay. It just means that when you're
You can also spin up multiple caches too. And so instead of trying to update everything in like the main cache, like maybe there's a game, like each game server gets its own view.
Yeah.
Or maybe we spin up, a separate database or something like for each game server. There's ways we can figure out that problem.
So Roddy,
So, I mean, the way I typically like to do it, especially for web-based games, is I like to have a sync step that's usually at like the 500 millisecond mark. That's a TCP communication. That's a game sync. And then in between that, I like to have all of the UDP actions. So that means, that every 500 milliseconds, the game's pretty much resynced on the player side. And then as much as, the UDP actions that they can get is, keeps the game performant and up to date. That being said, I want to take a second because we had some comments in Twitch chat about people being new to game design, right? And kind of point out a couple things here. First one is when we say gameplay loop, we're talking about that while loop in the code. Basically, every game, whether it's a client or a server, has a loop where it just goes through and updates the simulation, updates the universe. And that's basically all you need for a video game. So each one of these steps here, understand the network stack, communicate with anything else, do your simulations, update everything that's going to be displayed and send it out, right? It's the same if it's on a client or a server, essentially. And that's what makes the game.
Yeah, the only difference is here we're going through the TCP stack. We're going down the TCP stack onto the network, into the client, up the TCP stack, and then we update, right? You just have an extra, somewhat complicated step in the middle.
Yeah.
So I'll just pop up the Unity side, even though I can't completely open source it here now, but we should be able to run through Unity here as well and join. Connect, join. Yeah, so here we are in Unity as well. I can't actually see the other players because they're too far out at the moment. I think I moved them off the screen. But essentially, like, it's a pretty standard Unity layout. We've got some code in there. We've got some prefabs, and we've got some scenes, right? The key part here is, like, from the networking point of view, is the messaging client, and then the protocol buffer stuff, right? And then I think for graphics here, I was using something called Futile, which was like a small 2D plugin to simplify doing 2D in Unity. Because back around 2012, 2013, it wasn't nearly as powerful as it is now. So that was done and open source by somebody named Matt Ricks, who, if you remember TrainYard back from the early iOS days, that was like his first big hit in mobile.
Cool.
So yeah, so like I said, there's a bunch of stuff in the code there. Let's see if I still have my model.
There is a Box2D JS port of Box2D C.
Just out of curiosity, Roddy, have you looked at the byte size of the messages coming over the wire?
I haven't recently. I did at the time, but that was 8 years ago, so I really have no remembrance of what they might have been.
Threve.
Like how tightly it's getting packed. You said in the binary.
If you look at the protocol buffers, the protocol buffers is a Google thing. So like it's the foundation for gRPC, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So they're pretty concerned about their serialization, right? So one of the things you can do, you can set the size of the fields to be fixed to certain decimal lengths so that it can better pack the data. so that like if there's a certain precision you don't need, just cut it off. And that way you can pack it into the least number of bits possible.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. That
And,
you,
one thing that I just kind of want to point out for our viewers on Twitch is, well, we do talk a lot about like little steps that we can do to optimize, right? We are just kind of like pointing them out. One of the big traps that you can encounter in game development is premature optimization, and you can
Absolutely.
encounter that in any programming world, but especially game development. And so that's something that you'll kind of see us do is we'll just kind of like sketch out something. We'll talk about some of the performance traps with it. But when we actually come down to like writing the code, we're not going to optimize stuff until we need to in order to keep the velocity and development where we want it to be.
Yeah, you can totally boil the ocean
Yeah.
trying to make things work better before you
Yeah.
even know if they
Totally.
work.
yeah, like even when you're trying to prototype something, it's okay to send over straight JSON at the beginning, and then
You mean like
Yeah.
the game lobby?
yeah,
Yeah, and like in this case,
Yeah.
all this stuff is TCP based, right? Not UDP based. So, I mean, you're going to run in when you're talking about going over the internet, you're going to run into the header line blocking problem, that kind of thing, right? So eventually, we want to move to a UDP
Who
based
cares?
model. But like, this is something I dug out and dusted off, and
Yeah.
prettied up a little bit, right? So it's something that's here and works, and hopefully will get us to the next step, maybe, right?
yep,
So that's a good question in our tail 15 minutes, right? Like what is the logical next step? So I know Roddy, like you had kind of dusted this stuff off, but you don't have a ton of time to work on the server client side. Jared and another gentleman, Michael. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Was Michael on the last stream?
Michael was on the last stream. Yeah, he couldn't.
was.
Yeah. So Jared and Michael have a little bit more time, but they're not C people. They're node people. And so
I mean, I know C++. That was my first job was writing C++, but
yeah, but like
and looking at
what were the first 2 digits in the year?
yeah, looking at his code, it didn't look too hard to understand. But the cool thing that I really like about Roddy's prototype that he's got already is it's socket based. That was the one thing I was going to say. When we were talking on chat, it sounded like we were making HTTP REST calls to synchronize stuff, and I'm like, that's going to be way too slow. Like it has to be a socket and a real-time stream, like every 15
At least a
minutes.
WebSocket. Yeah.
Yeah. So if he's already is running over a socket, even if it's on messages, it seems like it's still performant. Like it's and also on top of that, you get the added bonus of the automatic binary packing of the messages, which we talked about, which isn't important at the beginning, but it still means we're trying to design something scalable, and that's absolutely something you need if you want to be like thousands of people playing and have it be performant. So I'm still, so I would not be opposed to extending what Roddy's got already. Like it might be harder than, it would definitely be harder than doing Node.js, because I would have to remember some of the nuances of C++, but
Well, to be fair, at least it's not completely
yeah.
modern. It is barely C++ 11.
Okay.
So maybe it fits in the right era of your C++ knowledge, because it certainly does for me. Because
Yeah.
of course there's been C++ 14 and C++ 17, and all the compilers are working on being 20 compliant now. So there's been a lot of additions to the language.
I mean, I'm not hugely worried because it's not like we're in a hackathon or something where like your prowess in the language is being judged, right? We're trying to ship a demo, we're trying to ship a game, so we don't need to do fancy templating. We don't need to do any sort of crazy build system, right? We just need to get it working. It needs to be clean and simple and easy to reproduce.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're at the point where we've got a terrible lobby that is functional, right? And so the next step would be like, well, how do I go from my lobby to
the
launch a client,
That's right.
which then connects to a server?
Yeah. So I think
and then the other piece is like, what does the server need to know about the user who connected via the client? And that's why I was concerned about the data structure thing, was like, I can create, when the user logs into the lobby, we can query the data grid and find out, like, does the user have an account in the data grid? Okay, let's initialize them to the basic state, which is like some place in the universe, you know,
Sector
maybe
0.
marginally randomized kind of thing.
Yeah. Rhea says we need Easter eggs, so don't
Absolutely.
forget about
Need
that.
Easter eggs? What
Yeah.
kind of Easter eggs?
We have to have some Easter eggs.
We'll have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Fun stuff to find.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you just need to spend some time figuring out what the integration steps are, right? Like the lobby, even from a messaging point of view, there's Ruby clients, right? If we needed to do that, it's possible from a technical point of view. From the point of view of either this server or the Node.js, it can speak to JDG.
Well, you
We've
wrote
determined
the game client in Unity.
Right. So then that's a slight. So looking at the code, it was written to be not completely tied to Unity, right?
Good.
Obviously, at some level it is because you have to render using Unity stuff and the Unity engine. You have to have cameras and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the most part of it might be able to move to Godot.
Yeah.
So
Well, do
it's
we?
C# right? Godot has a great mono implementation that Microsoft provided. Unity's C# implementation is mono under the hood.
Sure.
All we're talking about is Godot rendering stuff versus Unity.
I get that, but then
Well,
the other question is like, what about just browser like web geo?
Right. So Godot does
Godot
that,
has
right?
yeah.
So
Godot can
Podescape,
export to the web.
as we referenced earlier from podescape.io there, mentioned in chat, is written in C#, and then it's basically compiled to WASM, to WebAssembly, and an HTML file is stuck with it, and that basically goes up, and that's it, right?
Well, and something we talked about earlier too is we want to kind of design this in a way where the client can be anything, right? So if somebody
Right.
wants to go make a Unity client that's gorgeous and has all the graphics and stuff, you know, they can
They
do
could.
that, right? If somebody
Right.
wants to run it in a web browser, they can do that, right? I think
Totally
our
understood,
implementation
yeah.
is going to be decided by who has the time to go build a client.
Well, and so that was the thing, like whoever's going to build the client, you know, whatever's the easiest way to first do it. And so if Godot compiling to WebAssembly is going to be the fastest route, you know, I also don't know much in the way of C#, but we sort of already have like some existing pseudocode for Unity that I could maybe fart around with,
Yeah.
you know, and try
I
and
would
compile.
say that's in my opinion, that should be a very last resort using Unity. Like we should try.
No. I'm not saying use Unity. I'm saying use Godot.
Okay.
If Godot can compile to WebAssembly, hey, that's great. Compile to WebAssembly. I can't write C#. Well, I've never looked at it, right? So I don't know how
It has
good or
GD
bad.
script.
But in Godot, you can also
Python.
mix. You
Yeah.
can mix scripts, right? You can mix languages.
So if you know Python, you can do GD script.
Now, I don't know how that would work with the output to WebAssembly, because obviously there have to be different types of compilation to WebAssembly there, right? I think in theory, when I did the research, when I was looking at Podescape, it was possible. Like you could use the built-in Godot language GD script along with C# and have them both output in a WebAssembly build and functional together.
Yeah, either way, I'm not super concerned with it. We'll circle back and say like, let me rephrase. What do we think would be the easiest thing to do from a client perspective for our demo purposes? Is it Godot? Is it Unity? Is it something completely different? Is it, you know, JavaScript?
I think we have the most skills around Godot because we have the Podescape dev team. We've got other people in the company who know Godot.
That is the big benefit of moving to Godot, right? I mean, outside of the fact that it's open source and it's pretty awesome, like
yes,
there are people in the community, and then there's our own Red Hat community, all of which already know Godot. So as a demo to present to the gaming community, to the open source game community, I think that would be a familiar landscape.
Totally.
Okay, so
It's
maybe the next step. Sorry, go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, and then so I co-host Open Jam with Michael Clayton, and the whole point of that is to like raise awareness of open source engines. So I would feel like I'd be almost betraying my community if we used Unity in this project.
No, again, I'm not, if there was another, if you told me that, Pygame was the best way to do it, like, okay, fuck, let's use Pygame. Like,
Right. So
sorry, language.
just
But yeah.
just
Go
to throw
ahead.
one other alternative on the table, like one other thing that we could do is take the existing server, which has all the messaging technologies and protocol buffers and all that goodness in there, and turn it around and bolt the front end on, right? It's a more minimal thing. It's then you're in one language instead of multiple, but we don't get the win of being in Godot with its community and the familiarity.
What do you mean
that
by
we all have.
bolting the front end onto this game server?
So the game server already knows how to talk protocol buffers. It already knows how to talk to the broker, which is everything the client needs to do except for display stuff, right? So you could take the core of the C++ server and get like a C++ rendering engine, like the one I
That
had
sounds like
previously,
way more work.
which
Well, so
it might be more work, but I'm just throwing it out there for discussion.
So it is worth a point that most developers, last time I did a survey of game developers, most developers that use a custom engine do exactly that. They write the game server and they write the game client, and it's all the same code base, and it's just two separate build paths, but it's almost identical. So it's just worth saying that. That being said, I was going to make an MS-DOS client real quick, so
In what language?
Basic.
Basic.
Yeah, basic, absolutely.
If you can find a stomp protocol I mean, it says you can write a stomp client in a few hours, so.
Yeah, exactly. Problem solved. Do that tonight.
You don't want to do it in Pascal instead?
Yeah, I'll
That's
do
what
it,
it's doing.
Pascal. That's the language.
Yeah, well, no. So I guess the other question, like, and I don't know enough about the WebGL rendering graphical thing. Like, is there not a way? Because all we're really trying to do on the client side for the MVP like demo is take keyboard input and show things on the screen. And so,
True, but you also actually want to be able to build on top of that and have it scale.
have
so
what
that-
scale?
Well,
The
with
client?
regards to, the client will need to extend its functionality over time as we add new things in the background.
Understood, but I'm saying, like, for the
Right?
purposes of quick and dirty and get it done, like, is there something even simpler than Godot? Like, something pure JavaScript drawing things.
Yeah. Now, JavaScript is probably the simplest, quick way to do this.
And so can JavaScript easily draw like 2D?
Well, oh yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's what Zorbio and SquareOff and
Yeah,
all
so what I'm getting at is like, and to Derek's point about anybody making a client, what we really need is we need to document the API for the game server and the message format and the protobuf.
Right. Well, that's where the proto.
That's the thing is like if we did it, maybe I missed or jumped to conclusions, but writing 2D games in JavaScript is super easy. The messaging protocol that the server understands, I don't know what the support is in JavaScript.
There's like 5 stomp clients for JavaScript.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So the question is, the one great thing that's about protocol buffers is that once you write the protos, right? Like, so protocol buffers have their own explicit message format text file, right?
Right.
So I just dropped the link in there. I'll drop it in main chat too. So you have a .proto file and you run a proto compiler, which basically, for the given languages that are supported, which there's a long list. So for example, C++ and C# in this case, you run a compiler, the C++ proto compiler on the proto file, and it dumps you out a builder, like the builder pattern, that then you use the builder to basically fill those data structures, right? And to use them. And then C# wise, you also run the proto buffer compiler on the proto file, and it gives you a C# builder, which you also use to then access the same data, right? So that way you have the same data structure on the server and the same data structure on the client. And proto buffer compilers, which have support for multiple different languages, allow you to generate builders for any language you want.
Okay,
There's
cool.
a protobuf
Yeah.
JS library
Yeah.
that I just pasted in the Restream chat that will work with proto files.
Yeah. So if we can do
Yeah,
that
no, there's a ton of them.
with JavaScript, and the protocol support is there, like making things move around on the screen is so easy to do. But
Yeah,
then
I mean,
it's got phaser and stuff like that.
So let's target that as the next kind of thing for next month. Is like, we've got a basic data structure figured out. We've got the basic lobby. If we do it in the browser with just JavaScript, I can send the user from the lobby to a client instance in their browser, because we're already in the browser for the lobby. And so it's basically just like, we need to figure out the API spec for communicating back and forth with, which it sounds like it's already there, but it's just a matter of like the JavaScript
Making it
piece of it.
explicit.
But it's pretty much like, okay, when I hit W, this has to be sent. When I, and then when I see this, it means the other players or wherever. Maybe we can have a prototype of the same game server as it stands now and AMQ, and we'll just get it all running in OpenShift, and then just have a web browser pure JavaScript front end. Does that sound like a theoretical?
Sounds good to me as a plan.
Yeah, if you were gonna ask me to do it, that's exactly the way I would do it. Absolutely, grab like 3JS or something like that, any sort of vector library for JavaScript, write that client, interface it with what Roddy already has running.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then
Cool.
the other great thing if we go that route is we'll get Michael's skills, because he's JavaScript,
Which would be
developer,
great.
So,
that's
a big deal.
Sort of yet another thing, right? Now, again, not that I have anything against Godot, but I think the other thing is, if we go this route, we can keep the web JavaScripty one as simple as possible.
Mhm.
And then if somebody wants to write a Godot client,
They can go right ahead.
they can do it, because they just have to speak the same API. And then it's just a matter of like, all right, in the lobby, if you want to run your Godot client, you just need this URL or whatever. We can figure that out so that it launches the Godot client, XDG open kind of thing. And then you can have whatever cool, awesome graphical, wizardry and sound and, all the other things. Not that you can't do those with JavaScript, but, somebody could just really go bananas with a cool Godot client. Or if somebody wants to write a Unity client or a Python client or whatever engine they want to use, like some yet to be determined open source engine, they could do that, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so this was a fun episode. Thanks for joining. We had 20, 30 people the whole time, which is pretty cool. Hi Mom, if you're watching, I guess, I don't know. But yeah, so we'll see you all next month. It might not be a full 4 weeks because we got a little off kilter due to some scheduling stuff. By all means, stay tuned to other things on OpenShift TV. And if I could figure out how to send a raid to another channel, I would. But I don't know how to do that from Restream. So thanks again for watching. We will be with you again sometime soon. And I will go to the outro bumper. Bye-bye.